what is the solution in a place? I mean, because you've described a lot of particular obstacles in South Carolina. And I was
Mhm.
thinking about, I forget the exact number, but it was something like 40, 50, 60% of black voters in South Carolina said that the Clyburn endorsement was dispositive for them in voting for Joe Biden. Joe Biden has incredibly strong numbers for voters, black voters over 60, voters, older voters generally speaking. There's something like 76% of all black voters over 60 voted for Joe Biden. You've described the kind of time investments that are required to make a dent in the relationship structures that are exist in South Carolina. So, what is the plan to break through? Is Marianne planning to spend more time in the state? I guess it should have been started yesterday or a year ago, maybe even, but starting now at the very least. Like what do you see as the path to victory there?
What do I see as the path to victory here is like having Marianne come, having people hear Marianne and actually listen, like Carlos was saying. When people are giving her a chance and like hearing her and seeing her and interacting with her, they're coming on board. And so you got to do that. It's kind of tedious work, but it works. It's old school politics, it's retail politics. You still got to do that down here in South Carolina. It's just a different group of people you're doing it with. So as long as you're doing that, putting that time in, talking to the people, hearing their voices, seeing how your Marianne's campaign can solve so many of our issues here if she were elected president, and having that conversation with these people, you build that trust. You get that same benefit that people don't have beforehand because they're always so worried about Clyburn's machine that they're not putting into work to actually fight against the machine. So
You
we're
think Bernie didn't? I don't mean
yeah,
this. I'm going to want to know honestly what your perspective is. I'm happy to criticize Sanders. You think that there was basically a sense of this is a fait accompli. I'm not going to make any headway here, so I'm just not going to make investments in the state.
I think what happened here during that time was it wasn't enough investment into that face-to-face field time. It's not that we did the wrong strategy. We just didn't do it enough because you need more. It's not, it like I said, we move slower here, so it takes a little bit more time for people to adjust. And a lot of people were doing the fast in and out, and it's a little
No,
bit
I
slower.
take that point, Marcurius, but I guess what I'm thinking is without any other kind of amplification, without the amplification of someone who's popular in the state who can offer their endorsement and kind of do that work for you by proxy, without having the media on your side that could amplify your message. I mean, obviously, Marianne can't meet all, however many million people live in South Carolina. So I guess I agree with you. And Carlos, you said this as well. My experience is that when people meet Marianne first face to face or see her in a speech or something, they radically will change their mind about how they feel about her. I saw she posted a video, in an interview that she did with the Griot yesterday or the day before, and not very many people have watched it, but all of the comments are uniformly positive. The Griot, of course, is a black news site, and I see that over and over and over again. So I don't doubt that in the least. But my concern is, especially given the hesitancy of the DNC to allow there to be a debate, what are the opportunities for Marianne to get in front of enough people to actually make a meaningful electoral difference? And I want to welcome you back into this as well, Carlos.
So I will add a little bit to that. So before Carlos speaks, like, so getting to know people, getting to know like community leaders gives you that trust that like a local community leader might be able to move their 30 people better than Clyburn can because they have that. They're not in Clyburn's district. You don't see them. They're way out in some rural county like Lancaster, where like Clyburn's influence isn't as much. But your local leaders are there. So when you're coming in and talking and you're meeting with those people, they give you that trust. They give you that network that kind of spreads out and snowflakes out that you can get to win here in South Carolina. It's maybe not different, but it's just like people aren't trying to make those investments to meet with community leaders who know their community closer than like electeds do, because we don't have that many electeds here. So we're running off of our community leaders. And so when you start working with those people, you can turn out the voters and introduce them to Marianne through those people because I trust that person right there more than I trust the politicians that I see, because that's the person I'm working with. That's the person I'm in contact with. And so you have those opportunities here in South Carolina to build trust with different community groups, different activist groups that can do that same thing that kind of like Thorburn did for all of us who weren't burning folders here in South Carolina with your community people. And if you let that grow, if you develop that here, you have a strong chance of winning, because the grip that people see from a national level is a national level thing. It's not a South Carolina thing. So it's not as tight as people think it is, because they're not here, because all you see is the national narrative. You start going close and digging into things, you find the cracks in the system. And there are many cracks in the system that we can exploit. I don't want to say exploit, but benefit from, if we take that time to interact with these people, see these people, hear their voices, hear their concerns, see why they need universal health care, see why they need the U-turn for the economic system that we have so that they're getting money, see why we need to increase the living wage, see why we need to actually have an investment in trying to get more labor unions here in South Carolina. Like, we're like 51st in the country for like labor participation, but we can talk about those issues and get people on board if we come in here and actually take the time to have those conversations with
I'm curious. I'm saying this only, and you are as well, obviously, only as a kind of Bernie veteran. It has gotten to the point for me that is it that we need to get more people on board and convince more people of all of those good things? Or are we up against the same things that Bernie was up against in 2020, which is this idea that people's number one priority when polled is winning, is beating Donald Trump? That we're going to be in a similar situation this time around. If it's not Donald Trump, it's going to be someone who might as well be Donald Trump, like Ron DeSantis. And people, especially historically marginalized groups, well, not all of them, Black people, because as Carlos mentioned, Latinos are putting out feelers and trying other kinds of strategies. But, Black people feel as though the most important thing is to defeat the Donald Trump-esque person. And if they don't believe that Marianne Williamson is electable against those people, if they believe that Joe Biden is a proven quantity, and polls suggest as much, that no matter how much you convince people of what their personal needs are and how much more likely Marianne is to meet them, that they're still not going to come out and vote for her. I mean, what do you do about that? And does that seem to you to be as big of an obstacle as it seems to me to be?
So I'm not going to say that's not an obstacle, but like part of what we've been trying to do here in South Carolina over these last few years is overcome that. Like, it's talking about it, because that is a essential dread that people do have. But you got to show them the way that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, that there's more ways to beat Donald Trump than with just Joe Biden. And what we haven't been doing is talking about that, making democracy and the issues that we're running on prevalent to beating the Republicans. So what we do is we say Joe Biden is the only person that can beat Donald Trump. What you might need to do for some instances and say the only thing that's going to beat the Republicans is doing this U-turn on our economic system. The only thing that's going to beat the Republicans is bringing universal health care to all of our people to fix our needs. So you change how the conversation is going and make it about Marianne's campaign, about what Marianne is going to do, and about the things that bring people hope, that they want to see, the benefits to that. And you stop making it about a Joe Biden versus Trump thingy, or Joe Biden this. You make it as Marianne is our way to beating the Republicans. It's the way to be. You have to have that conversation. You have to take that step of faith forward for people to even to begin to think it is possible. So we are so focused on, I will say here, the negative stuff, because we've been beaten down. It's the only thing we see. But we have to start looking at the positive stuff to get that energy, to get that light, to get that purpose going, that we can have a better democracy. We can have a stronger democracy. And the crossover appeal to that, for people that are, we also have an open primary here. So the crossover appeal for that for other groups changes the electorate of who is voting. It changes who can be a Democrat. it changes who wants to be a Democrat by bringing Marianne into that. And so when you start doing that stuff, you bring in the traditional Democratic voters. You bring in the people who just don't like Biden. You
Well,
bring in.
let me ask both of you about that then. Carlos, I'm going to come to you first. Are there efforts being made to attract independent and Republican voters? And do you see any appeal that the Marianne is having, any kind of demonstrated appeal among those groups?
I have to say, I also want to address your first question about your listeners, viewers, maybe not being so excited about the Democratic Party. I can agree. I'm not excited about the DNC. I don't think anybody could be under the circumstances that we're living today. I'm excited about my party here in New Hampshire because we tend to do things much different than the DNC. And it's the obvious reason why they don't want us to go first. That is very crystal clear. So I'm not asking anybody to be excited about the DNC. What I'm asking them is to take control of their local parties. That's where the power is. That's where we're going to make change. That's how we're doing it here in New Hampshire. You know, I was able to win my election a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to be the first Latino on that rules committee ever in the state of New Hampshire. And we're breaking barriers everywhere in New Hampshire. We just elected in a very red town, a transgender man who's actually working for Marianne, who was an Elizabeth Warren supporter before. You know, I was a Bernie supporter before. We have somebody else from the Tulsi campaign. And this is an interesting point. We have people from all these camps that worked on all these different campaigns before joining Marianne. And Marianne has an ability to talk to Americans, not to talk specifically just to Black voters or to Hispanic voters or to Indigenous voters or to gay voters. She has an ability to speak to American voters. And that's something that she emphasizes a lot. And I think she's just different. She's able to attract those people. Also, Americans are tired of voting for the less of two evils. That is very crystal clear.
Look, guys, I appreciate all of this. And certainly, you know, I guess I'm pushing back because I think that people don't want to, at least in this context, people listen to this episode, they are more familiar with Marianne than the average voter. They don't need to be convinced of what she stands for. Some people disagree with some of what she stands for. They disagree with some of her foreign policy takes. They agree with other parts of her or her domestic agenda or whatever it is. But the concerns are not about that, ultimately. People, except for some people who I think the foreign policy stuff is a deal breaker, put them to the side. That's their choice. Other people are like, why should I invest in this again? Why should I give my donation to this again when the system is so rigged, unless I'm being given like demonstrable changes in strategy that are likely to have a different, to create a different outcome. So that's what I ask you, you know, are there,
We're not going to
what's going on? You know, are there efforts being made? You know, is appealing to independent and Republican voters really a part of the strategy that's going to help in these open primary states? And if so, what does that look like? What is the infrastructure that's being put into effect on the ground in South Carolina that enables Marianne's time spent in the state to be most effective? Are there going to be efforts to try to meet with people like Jim Clyburn, who Bernie Sanders kind of famously said, I don't want to shake hands and wish happy birthday. Maybe that hurt him in certain parts of the country. Does Marianne have a different approach? When you say about New Hampshire, Carlos, that they do things differently there and they're not quite so beholden to the kind of these national politics, and you've said the same thing, Mercurius. What specifically does that mean? Help the listeners understand what opportunities you see, because I think that's on some level going to be much more persuasive to them than this idea that Marianne appeals to a lot of people. Like, we got that. Like, people know that. People here are familiar with Marianne.
I don't mean to be boring. The strategy in New Hampshire, it's not
it's not about you being boring. I just want you to make the best case to this kind of different audience than the normal audience, the more generalized audience that you are usually talking to.
The strategy in New Hampshire is not much different than what we did for Bernie, because it worked. And Progressive won. So there's no reason to change the wheel. New Hampshire is not looking for change. New Hampshire just wants the DNC to mind its business and let us conduct our primary. And I can only speak to what we're going to do here in New Hampshire. We have the infrastructure in place. We have phenomenal staff that are very experienced, that come from different progressive wings within the progressive wing and Democratic politics. We are attracting independent voters. There's even libertarian voters that like how Marianne speaks about government and just less government in general. And there are voters in New Hampshire. New Hampshire is very independent. There's a lot of veterans in the state of New Hampshire who actually don't disagree with Marianne's foreign policy, especially when it comes to Ukraine. As a progressive and as a Democrat, I actually don't disagree with Marianne on Ukraine. I know that's a controversial subject on some progressive politics. Sorry, I cut out there for a second. But I have to say, you know, in New Hampshire, none of those things are a deal breaker. I think the only obstacle we have here in New Hampshire, people are asking, they want somebody with experience. So we have been doing a much better job at presenting New Hampshire voters to Marianne to make sure that they understand Marianne's background in community work, in churches, in with the HIV/AIDS crisis in the 80s. You know, these are important facts that the media has been trying to hide or twist or misrepresent. And so we've been doing a much better job at just making sure that people, Granite Staters here, understand her background and all the experience that she brings to the table.
Well, that's a great example, Carlos. I'm glad you brought that up.
If you've been in DC for your whole entire career, that's not experience. And that's actually not what we need. You know, Joe Biden, the only thing he has to bring to the table is the fact that he's been in Congress his whole entire life. Why do we want more of that?
I'm glad you brought up that particular example of we've gotten a little early taste of the strategy that is likely to be deployed against Marianne. The women of The View last week, or maybe it was the week before, covered her campaign, and Sunny Hostin in particular accused Marianne of having been dismissive of the AIDS crisis, arguing that she didn't, thought that people could self-heal or something like that, in a way that I think pretty egregiously misrepresented her record of offering spiritual support to people who are dying from that crisis and being ignored by the government, generally speaking, as that crisis was ongoing. Strategically, I mean, The View is a huge platform. And given the barriers that we've discussed already to Marianne accessing other kinds of large platforms like a debate stage, what kind of discussions have there been about how to push back against that, especially since so much of left media also is not, frankly, very supportive of Marianne? Much of it is, obviously, but some of it isn't. So strategically,
I think we've done a great job at making sure that these gay people that were directly affected during the AIDS crisis and HIV crisis, I wasn't born during that. I was born in '89, so it was that happened before my time. But what I can tell you is we're putting people in front of Marianne, and we're bringing these people on board, these people that were maybe silent last time when she ran, that are now coming up and speaking up. There's a beautiful video that we just put out of this person giving a testimony about his relationship with Marianne and him living through the AIDS crisis and the influence that Marianne had on him. And the fact that it is not true. Marianne never told any of these people, do not take your medication. So that's what we're doing. We're letting voters choose for themselves. You can hear it from The View, which is an entertainment source, and you can take it for whatever you want, or you can take it directly from the person that is being affected or was affected during those times. And that's really, this is the type, we know, Bernie used to say this, the revolution is not going to be televised. And we have learned some valuable lessons from 2020 that we know that the media is not going to give us, at least the CNN and MSNBC is not going to give us a fair shake. But that's fine. Voters in New Hampshire are not making political decisions based on CNN, MSNBC, or The View for that matter. They're making decisions based on their interaction with the politicians that are coming here and the people that they're listening to. People like myself that have been working in these communities for 15 years. People like other people that work in our campaign that have been in the state for 20 plus years working in politics, that have been, I was in AmeriCorps for 3 years. My opinion has probably a lot more weight in this state than probably The View will have. And so we're going to do everything possible to push back against those lies. And we have no problem confronting whatever it is and making sure that we talk. I think the difference between last time Marianne and this time is that she has a team that is not afraid to speak up, a team that is also in the trenches and in power, that is able to say, hey, wait a second, this is not true. And third of all, there's a different energy with Marianne this time around, that she is not willing to just sit there and take the punch. She's going to punch back and say, hey, that's not true, and here are the facts. And we're going to bring receipts to the table, and we would love to debate Biden because we will make the case at the stage. And I think that's partly another reason why they don't want to debate Marianne. She's going to bring the receipts to the table, and we have no problem. And we have so many people, even that political article that came out, which I thought was a low blow. Just basically, we have tons of staff speaking up saying they loved working with Marianne. They still love working with Marianne. I've had a couple of people call me and say the same thing. They're like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I'm perfectly fine." She is like any other boss. She tells me what I need to do, but I also tell her, "Hey, this is what we need on the ground." We have a great time on the campaign trail. The energy's there. We're enjoying the campaign. And I have so many voters coming out. We had voters last time she was here during a snowstorm. There was a state warning that there was going to be this giant blizzard coming, and people still came out. We had people that didn't agree with Marianne show up. And still the level of civility and conversation that happened in that room is admirable. And it's what the American public is ready for.
Well,
so
let me ask you about
skepticism, but
let me ask you about that, guys. Since you brought it up, for those who don't know, there was a political article last week titled "Marianne Williamson's Abusive, in quotation marks, Treatment of 2020 Campaign Staff Revealed." In it interviewed 12 people, I'm reading from it now, who worked with Williamson during her 2020 presidential campaign, paint a picture of a boss who can be verbally and emotionally abusive. A staffer said, quote, "It would be foaming, spitting, uncontrollable rage." I mean, what is your guys' reaction to that story? Do you know anything about the sources and what's going on there?
Yeah, one of the sources that spoke up happens to be somebody from New Hampshire. And I don't want to really get too much into details. This is somebody that I actually admire and have a lot of respect for. And I'm not here to question victims. I'm always about believing victims, whatever they say. But that said, just those comments alone, would we say that about somebody like Joe Biden? Would we say that about Barack Obama? We would never say that about a male figure. So, those words that they use, as a man, I'm actually offended for women in this country that this is how we speak of.
I mean, so Carlos, I definitely think that we have seen on video Joe Biden behave in ways that I would describe as foaming, spitting rage. Like we saw him jab his finger in the chest of that was it some kind of like plant in the 2020 race and antagonizing this guy in a hard hat. We've seen him say "listen, fat," and challenge one of his critics to push-ups because he got so angry. We know that he's had a number of Me Too allegations made against him, et cetera, et cetera. But I would also say that some people are going to think, well, even if we wouldn't hold a man accountable for behaving badly, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't hold women accountable for behaving badly. So, I mean, what do you say to people who have some concerns about this?
I mean, I'm a younger generation where I don't see gender, I don't see color, I don't see sexual orientation. I treat everybody how they treat me, and I can only speak to my experience. I am not here to discredit any of the victims. I don't believe in doing that. I think that's when they go low, we go high. I can only speak to my experience. I would never work for somebody that doesn't treat me well. And two, I would never leave my children with somebody I don't trust. And I have to tell you this quick story. Last year, Marianne came here. It was around my daughter's birthday. My mom was not feeling good. I had to bring my daughter with us on the trail. And I said, "Is it okay?" And she said, "Oh, absolutely. I love kids." And I actually left Marianne and my daughter for quite some time together while I was organizing the event. And they had such a good time, beautiful moments. I saw what I want my president to look like. They were reading books on the floor together. I have the pictures, and I just couldn't believe that this is how people are speaking about Marianne. And I've talked to a lot of people on the campaign trail that have had personal experiences with Marianne for a very long time, including somebody who was a roommate for many years. And she had nothing but amazing stories to tell about Marianne. I have only known Marianne personally since August of last year. Before that, it was just strictly political. But I've gotten to know her on a personal level, and I have to tell you, she's inspiring. She has challenged me when I needed. I'm not a perfect person. I'm 33 years old. I'm still learning. And she has always challenged me to be a better person. As a gay man, as an Indigenous Hispanic here in the state of New Hampshire, that is all I can hope for a boss that will make me a better person. So again, I can't attest to what experiences those people went through, but out of hundreds of people that I've spoken to that have had a personal experience with Marianne, and including my own personal experience, I can't discredit my own experience for something that maybe somebody else is speaking to. And the fact that, why now? Why are they talking about this now? Why didn't it come out when she was running last time? why didn't they do this when she dropped out last time and said, hey, good riddance, she dropped out, so those are things that I'm really, she's a Jewish woman running for president in a state where anti-Semitism happens every day. I am too familiar with what this looks like.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.